little bit nervous talking about this. It seems quite a long time ago.
You can have all the time and space you need.
Well, I grew up in Rotherham, and I spent time in children's home in Rotherham before I eventually was placed with in a private foster arrangement. It bothers me because this is a bit of a scapegoat. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking away from what's happened. What happened was abhorrent. It was vile, and these people need to be brought to justice.
Yes.
But I think, and the more I read about these things, there's an underlying issue that seems to always be ignored. I mean, I started going to nightclubs at the age of 13. I didn't have, obviously you can tell from my background with the care system, etc. I didn't have great parents. And it was quite common. A lot of the girls my age, all the girls that I associated with were very much the same. We all started going to nightclubs at the age of 13 with older blokes from the local villages. These were sort of in their 20s and everything. And it became very normal that the girls were sleeping with older blokes.
Listen.
These are white men. These were not Muslims.
I hear you. I'm just going to clarify that I'm a little bit uncomfortable doing this, but when you say sleeping with, it is actually rape.
Well, hindsight, yeah, but this is the point I'm trying to make.
I know.
It was, I mean, for example, my first boyfriend when I was 13 was 21.
Right.
By the age of 15, I mean, it was the norm. Men ranging between sort of late teens, I think the old sometimes into their early 40s. And these were all white men. And essentially, it normalised it to, everybody knew somebody that had an older boyfriend.
Really?
I
haven't heard this before.
It was, everybody I knew had an older boyfriend. They were going out clubbing at the age of 13, 14. We got drunk. I got myself in some states. I remember one occasion going off with a couple of blokes that we'd met in a town 40 miles away, didn't have any way of getting home, but we went back because that was what you did. And the issue is that I think what the Muslim community did, they didn't create this. They became organised in how they did it, and I think that's the difference. But it was already happening, just not organised.
Well, not in gangs either. I think that's
they weren't in gangs, but I mean, it's just as prolific, just not. And this is the thing, and what gets me is when people tag on to this Muslim thing. These men are paedophiles. Paedophilia has no religion. It has no morals, and the issue is. The real issue was the vulnerability of girls. We didn't really have parenting. Before I went to my foster family, my mum used to phone school up at 7 o'clock in the morning when I'd come crawling through the door to tell them that I was poorly, too sick to go into school.
So your mum knew what was going on and was powerless
I was allowed to stay over at my boyfriend's, boyfriend's inverted brackets houses. A lot of the girls I knew were allowed to stay over at their boyfriend's houses.
This is where the racism element comes in, because the argument, as I understand it, was that if these crimes committed by brown men had been investigated while the crimes that were committed against you were not, then there would have been room to claim that the Muslim or Pakistani offenders were being treated a lot more stringently than the men you describe as encountering when you were growing up.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It's really, I don't know, it's hard to put into words, but it just bothers me. And the issue is obviously, with the joys of Facebook now, you see people that you used to know. And some of the most prolifically vocal people that I see posting on Facebook about the anti-grooming gangs, I sort of sit there and think, hold on, you were in your early 20s and you had a girlfriend that was 14, 15 years old when we were younger.
And you know these men?
Yeah. And I sit there thinking, how can you be... Because the issue is as well is... And if you speak to girls, I mean, I still don't look at that I was abused, because in my head I was fully aware of what was going on.
And that again explains why convictions were initially hard to secure, because the young women. I don't know what to say to you when you say that. I'm not going to lie to you. It doesn't happen to me very often, but I'm lost for words because I think it would make you feel. I can't try and persuade you that you were a victim of a crime, even though statistically and legally you were, because you've made your peace with what happened, I think. Yeah,
but it does bother me now. I've now got two daughters.
Yes.
They're not even double digits yet, but sure. I sort of look at them, and one of them's not a million miles away from double digits, and I sort of sit there thinking, in the space of 6-7 years, if she was to be doing what I was doing, and what most of the girls that I knew were doing, I'd be I'd be mortified. I'd be on the phone to the police
and
I'm
sure it won't happen. But
that was the issue with places like Rotherham and Rochdale. When the industries closed down, this was what they became. When the coal mines closed and everything else, there was nothing for anybody. I call myself the divorce generation. I mean, my parents divorced when I was 4, and I was one of the only ones. By the time I hit my teens, most people had divorced parents.
Yes.
And it was almost like the parents didn't know how to deal with it, and a lot of kids were left to just sort of fend for themselves.
Yes, because the infrastructure wasn't in place for 2 working parents and no or split childcare or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You were left to your own devices. The latter day latchkey
kids. With the closure
kids.
of the industries, drugs and alcohol crept into the villages, and it wasn't the best place to raise a child, but
No.
it just bothers me that it feels like there's a bit of a scapegoat with this latching onto the Muslim. And don't get me wrong, yes, they deserve everything that the law throws at them, and that there should be heads that rolled because people knew and didn't do things.
Yeah, but you were there, and you were being abused, and you don't recognise the reality as it's now being described 20 years later.
The issue to me is it still feels like, yes, there is a bit of a cover-up, but not in the sense that people think there's a cover-up.
No.
In the sense of the bigger picture is not being looked at. These men just capitalised on something that was already there. If these girls hadn't been vulnerable and that behaviour hadn't already been normalised, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did.
So I don't want to over-speculate, but if a British Pakistani taxi driver had you and your white abuser who you thought was your boyfriend in the back of the car, then that potentially gives him ideas. Yes. Because you can see that this girl's young, she's already drunk,
doing that sort of thing anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual to her. It was already normalised, and they just came and they organised themselves with it.
That's where it moves.
The same as the original people that did it. They're no worse. They're no better.
Crikey, I'm not going to argue with you, but I almost did. Then I had to stop myself. I think they are slightly worse because this gang element I find repulsive, but I'm not. Like I said, I'm not going to argue with you. Can I ask you 2 more questions?
No,
when you were in care, what could they do to stop you going out to meet men?
Well, the care. I actually spent very little time in actual children's homes per se. They were more sort of overnight things. The police were great. I remember the police turning up to my house, had black eyes and bust lips, and I was the one that got taken away in the police car and put in a cell and shipped off to a children's home. But there was nothing that anybody could do to stop us because that mentality had already set in.
Yes.
I did what I wanted to do because that's what I'd been allowed to do, and there would have been nobody or anybody that could have told me different.
These are so easy. So much easier to understand and believe what you described than it is to understand and believe these ludicrous conspiracy theories that have grown up around real and present crimes. That because you speak in such a matter-of-fact way, which leads me to my final question. How did you manage to sort yourself out so spectacularly?
I went down a lot worse before I got better.
Okay.
I moved down south with my real mum.
Yeah.
And was homeless at 18, and I found myself in a domestic violence situation. I used to get locked in the house on weekends, cigarettes stuck out on my skin. He swallowed my SIM card, so I couldn't phone anybody. I hit rock bottom, basically, and just woke up one day and thought, that's not me, this isn't the life that I want, and just picked myself up from there, really. I'm fortunate that I've got, I'm relatively intelligent. I always did well at school, so even though I hardly ever went to school, I picked myself up and managed to get my GCSEs, and I clawed myself back. But it got a lot worse before it got better.
Yeah, they say. I'm in awe of your mental strength, actually, and your emotional literacy. I can't remember a call that has knocked me quite as sideways as yours.
It's quite scary for me to talk about because it's something that it happened, but it happened. I've moved on. That's not me. That's,
yes.
It was just another file it away sort of thing. But every time I read these stories and I see the anger aimed at the Muslim community for this, and yes, there should be anger, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that.
Nobody is, ever, actually.
To me, I just sit here thinking there's so much more of a picture to this than people are prepared to address. And that, to me, is the cover-up, because this is a mentality that goes not just through the Muslim community, but through...
There's predatory men.
Predatory men, that's what they are. And that has no religion.
I think if it's all right with you, I think what I'll take away most from what you've told me is you seeing on Facebook men who were statutory raping young women when you were...
Essentially, yes.
And are now leading the line on outrage and disgust at brown men doing the same.
Yeah,